In the last video, we talked a little bit about CSS and started working with it to create some basic global selectors, right? We were selecting the P tag and the image tag within our HTML document and modifying them on a global scale. But sometimes we want to be more specific, right? Sometimes I want to just select one paragraph or the other and not both. Other times we might reuse the same kind of set of properties over and over and over again, and we don't necessarily want to write a bunch of new code for that. So I'm in the Mozilla Developer Network in the CSS reference, and there's actually a great way to look at all the different types of selectors. Right here it says See Selector. Whenever we click that, it shows us a bunch of different options. So it shows us a type selector, which is what we've been using, where we've just been putting in an element name. A class selector, which we're going to get to in this class, of using a dot before the name. An ID selector, which isn't super important for us. Universal selectors, these are kind of cool. You can use them to select certain things. And then an attribute selector. There's also all these great types of combinators, which are really fascinating, and we'll get into at least one of these, but essentially this developer network reference sheet is a really great resource for you to kind of check out all the different content and figure out exactly what you're doing with CSS. Since we have limited time, we're not going to be able to get into a lot of this. Right, we're not going to probably be able to cover margins all that much, or text alignment, or shadows, or things like that. But you can certainly get into that just by going through this menu and just read a few of these. There's really not that many. It looks a little overwhelming at first, but you use so few of them that it's really not going to be too confusing once you get the hang of it. So I'm going to jump back into this, and we're going to talk about classes and other types of selectors. So in this case, I have a P right here and a P right here, right? Two paragraph elements, and they are both being modified by this paragraph selector in CSS. So anything I add to this, so if I add something like font style, and I say italic, it's going to make all of this italic. So we can modify different things here and add different properties, right, to change this P. But what if I only want to change one of these paragraphs, right? I just want to change this first paragraph and not this second one. So in that case, I want to use a class or an ID. In this class, we're just going to focus on classes. But a class is basically a property or a selector within CSS that we can use over and over again that kind of groups together a bunch of options. So I'm going to just type in class equals, so just like how we typed in href equals and then in quotes we would put our website, we do the same thing here, so I'll call this first paragraph, and let's give this one a class of second paragraph. Now notice nothing's actually changed here. This is because we still have this P selector, which is selecting all the P's regardless of their class, right? It's selecting all the paragraph tags. So let's just go ahead and delete this chunk of text for now. And let's write in some class selectors. So I'm going to go dot first paragraph. And this time I'll type in font size 30 pixels and hit save. So it's updated, and I'm only modifying anything that has the class of first paragraph. Now this name is just arbitrary, right? This could be called anything I want it to be called. I just need to keep it consistent between my CSS page and my HTML page. So I say first paragraph, let's give it like a color of let's actually use our color picker, which is Shift-Command-C. And I can just go through here. All right, great. So now we have a cool custom color. Let's make one for our second paragraph. So we have second paragraph. And we'll do a font size of maybe 10 pixels this time. And a color, Shift-Command-C. That's a really great tool By the way, if you're on Windows, you just want to check and see what your actual keyboard shortcut is. So Control-Alt-C on Windows. So Command-Shift-C on Mac and Control-Alt-C on Windows. So we have our second paragraph. So now we're modifying our second paragraph. Right? So classes are just ways to more highly specify what you're actually selecting. Now we can still select our P, and in fact that will be more of a global attribute. So if I go P, and let's say I want to do a font size of 48 pixels, we're not going to see any changes. This is because these are more specific than just this P selector. And in general, it's going to select the more specific one. So it's always going to go with the more specific selector, which is the class selector in this case. Now let's just delete this line and see what happens. If we delete this one, so it's going with the default from this P selector. Now it's going to this first paragraph selector and then the second paragraph selector. This can get a little confusing, and it's kind of hard to talk about, right? Because there's so many different terms being thrown around here. Just play with this and I think you'll understand it pretty quickly. Now one of the great things about using classes is that we're actually able to reuse them in places where they didn't originally exist. So if I really like this first paragraph style, well, I can just apply this class to this unordered list and it'll apply it to all the items within it. So let's say class first paragraph, and look at that. It's applied that CSS property to all of these elements. Now watch this list item. I could give this specific list item the second paragraph. And because it's more specific, because it's within this UL, we're now just modifying that one to be different. Again, it can be a little confusing. Just kind of play around with it and you'll see what happens. But let's say we want to modify this bold tag, this B right here. So we want to give this a special property. So if I went in here and I said B, and let's say, I'm just using font size because it's easy to work with, 40 pixels. So that means any words that are bolded are going to appear 40 pixels. Well, that's fine and all, but I don't really want to have to, make a specific class just to modify this one, because remember we have a bold up here. So what would I want to do if I wanted to just modify this one? Well, what I could do is use a specific combinator, which is kind of like a series of selectors that's almost like asking an if statement. So if I tell the CSS to access only bold tags within list items, we'll be able to do that. And that looks like this. List item, and then a greater than sign, and then this bold sign. So now what's happening is it's saying, go to a list item, and then within that list item, any bold tags, apply this effect to them. See, so we're no longer getting that effect on our HTML bolded item before. So here, just to show that again, I'll give this a color of red. Okay, so if it was just the B, it's going to apply both here and here, right? Because I have a bold tag up in my first paragraph and I have a bold tag down here. But if I use this cool little combinator, so li and then that, what I'm saying is go to list items and then any bold tags within list items, apply this effect to. So let's do the same thing down here. Let's do list items and italic tags. And we'll say color blue. So now it's kind of hard to see. Let's do green. So now this italic is now green. Going back to the Mozilla Developer Network, if I just step back a few steps, we can see that there's tons of other combinators in here. There's adjacent sibling combinators. There's these column combinators that are really cool, child combinators, descendant combinators, all sorts of different things to make it really specific. There's also, right below that, a bunch of pseudo classes, and pseudo classes are really interesting. These kind of change the, almost like the base functionality of something. So just to really quickly cover this, for instance, hover, this is the most common one that you'll use. I'm actually doing the hover command right now. Hover changes how the CSS looks whenever you're over something. So for instance, let's go ahead and just make a new CSS class for our for our anchor tags, right, for our links. And let's make it just quite a bit larger. So I'll make it, let's do 40 pixels. All right, so we have this. Okay, that's fine. So what if I want to change how this looks whenever I have my mouse over it? It's actually quite simple to do. I can do hover, and then any property I have in this, it's going to change. So if I do font size, let's say 50 pixels, now when I hover over it, it grows, it gets bigger, because it's only doing the hover selector here. I could change the color to red. So if I go back to this list of pseudo classes, there's tons of pseudo classes that deal with, what happens whenever they click on something, what happens whenever it's displayed a certain way. There's sorts of different things that you can check out. Same with these pseudo elements. You'll have to look at those yourself. But again, I'm throwing a lot of information at you, but basically it's just to kind of show you the basics of how CSS and HTML work together. So HTML kind of lays everything out and puts your content on the page, and CSS styles everything.